On my 65th birthday, my daughter-in-law didn't just skip my party. She tried to punish me because I wouldn't move my celebration to accommodate her luxury vacation. She needs a lesson in humility, she told my son. He just stared at the floor, too weak to speak up. So I just smiled, served cake to the people who actually showed up. And by the time she got back from her trip, her rent-free home, her paid bills, and her easy life under my roof were gone. For my 65th birthday, I really only wanted one thing, some peace and quiet time, to tend to the roses in my garden and a nice, thick slice of Black Forest cake. But my son Leo and his wife Blair had other plans, which they presented to me during Sunday brunch. "Mom, we need to talk." Blair started using that condescending tone she always adopted when she wanted something. "We booked this exclusive wellness retreat in Napa, and it happens to be right on your birthday weekend." I looked at her calmly, feeling the history of the house around me, and waited. She clearly expected me to offer to reschedule my party immediately, just like I used to do. "That sounds lovely for you. Napa is gorgeous in May," I said simply, stirring my coffee. Leo shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding my eyes. "Well, Mom, we thought you could just push your party back a week so we could be there. It wouldn't be the same without us." I set my cup down with deliberate care. In my quiet suburban home outside of Seattle, there used to be unwritten rules of respect. My late husband and I spent 30 years paying off this mortgage. Every brick in the driveway represented a sacrifice. "No," I replied firmly with a tone they hadn't heard before. "My birthday is May 20th. I've already invited my hiking club and booked a table at that little Italian place downtown." Blair let out a forced, sharp laugh, the kind of sound that set your teeth on edge. "Honestly, Martha, it's just a date. Are you really being that selfish? We wanted to show you how much family means to us, but you're making it impossible." She called it flexibility. I called it a total lack of respect for my time. Leo looked at the floor, his backbone seemingly made of jelly. Blair doubled down. "If you're going to be this stubborn, we aren't coming. I guess we have to show you that you can't treat us like this. A little humility regarding our schedule would do you some good." I didn't feel angry. I just felt a deep, cold clarity. The battle for my own home had begun. After Leo and Blair retreated to their suite upstairs, I sat in the silence of my kitchen for a long time. I didn't cry. Instead, I grabbed the folder containing the house documents. Blair and Leo had been living in my upstairs apartment for 3 years, rent-free supposedly, saving for a down payment. Out of motherly love, I had been covering the utilities, the internet, and most of the groceries. It was my mistake to let those boundaries blur so much. I pulled out the lease agreement we'd signed years ago as a formality, but never actually enforced. It was time to adjust their financial reality to match her lesson in humility. I crossed off the budget for our joint birthday dinner and replaced it with a list of the current rates for heating and electricity. The next morning at breakfast, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Blair ignored me completely, buried in her phone, likely looking for validation on Instagram. Leo tried to make small talk about the weather, but a sharp look from his wife shut him down instantly. I canceled the automatic transfer for the household expenses today. I mentioned casually flipping through the morning paper. Blair's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "What is that supposed to mean, Martha?" I looked her straight in the eye without blinking. "Since you're going on vacation and your priorities are so clear, I assume you're ready to be fully financially independent. It's only fair." I calmly explained that starting next month, I'd be treating the upstairs as a formal rental market rate rent and separate utilities. We're family. You can't do that, Blair cried, outraged. Exactly, I replied smoothly. And in a family of adults, everyone takes responsibility for their own choices. Leo turned pale, clearly doing the math on how their expensive trips would stack up against actual rent. Blair triumphantly announced that they were officially boycotting my birthday to show me who was really in charge. I just nodded and poured myself more tea. They thought their absence would break me, but they didn't realize I was already starting to enjoy the quiet. The week leading up to my birthday was marked by a strange, almost clinical silence. Blair tried to punish me by avoiding the common areas like the living room and the garden. They cooked on a little hot plate they'd bought hiding away upstairs. It was almost funny watching how much effort she put into making sure I felt lonely. I, on the other hand, loved the new order in my kitchen and the extra space in the fridge. I hired a professional landscaper to get the hedges and lawn into perfect shape, a task Leo had been promising to do since last fall. I left the invoice for the landscaping right on the kitchen table with a polite note requesting his half of the payment for the outdoor maintenance. On the morning of my 65th, I heard the thud of heavy suitcases on the stairs. Leo knocked softly on my door. "Happy birthday, Mom. We're heading to Napa. See you in a few days." He sounded miserable, but Blair's voice, barking from the hallway, cut the conversation short. She didn't even look at me as she slammed the front door. "Have fun at your sad, lonely party," she yelled over her shoulder. I didn't answer. Instead, I lit a high-end scented candle and started setting the long oak table in the garden for my guests. 12 place settings, fine china, and real linen napkins. Around noon, the first crack in Blair's plan appeared. A large delivery truck from a high-end furniture store pulled into my driveway. It was the designer sectional Blair had ordered weeks ago, shipped to my address, and set up as an automatic withdrawal from my secondary account. What she'd forgotten was that I had revoked her access to that account 3 days prior. The driver shook his head, showing me his tablet. "Payment declined, Mrs. Anzengruber." I smiled at the young man. "I'm so sorry. The people who ordered that are on vacation, and I have no need for a new sofa. I'm afraid you'll have to take it back." The truck drove away with the couch. Blair's latest status symbol was gone before she even got to sit on it. I felt a wonderful spark of self-determination. At 3 p.m. sharp, my garden came to life. My friends from the hiking club, my longtime neighbor Helen, and even my cousin from Chicago arrived. We laughed, drank some excellent California wine, and enjoyed homemade cake under the old apple tree. No one asked about Leo or Blair because I'd already let them know the kids had opted for a vacation instead. The atmosphere was light and genuine, free of the toxic comments Blair usually used to hijack every conversation. Helen toasted me. "Martha, you look 10 years younger today. Retirement finally seems to be suiting you." I realized she was right. The pressure to please everyone had finally evaporated. While we were celebrating, the angry texts started rolling in. Blair must have gotten a notification from the furniture store. "What did you do? Why isn't the couch at the house?" That was a limited-time offer. I read, it showed it to Helen, and we both had a good laugh. I didn't type a response. I just laid the phone face down on the table. There was no need to argue about things she couldn't afford but expected me to pay for. The sun dipped behind the trees and we grilled dinner in the twilight. It was the best birthday I'd had since my husband passed away. Late that night, after the guests had gone, I walked through the quiet house. I didn't feel lonely. I felt secure. I went into the basement and shut off the main water valve to the upstairs laundry hookup. Since Blair always overloaded my machine with my expensive detergent while I was sleeping, I'd inform them tomorrow that they needed to use their own dedicated lines in the basement laundry room, just like it said in the lease. I locked the connecting door to the upstairs. It wasn't an act of aggression. It was a clear marking of my private space. I slept deeply that night without a single worry on my mind. 3 days later, on a rainy Tuesday, they returned from Napa. Blair didn't look relaxed. She looked like a ticking time bomb. The first thing she noticed was the missing couch. "Where is my furniture?" "Martha, this is theft," she screamed before she even dropped her bags. I was sitting in my reading chair by the window, flipping through a catalog for art supplies. "The store couldn't process the payment, Blair. Since I'm not willing to finance your luxury lifestyle anymore, I refused the delivery. Simple as that." Blair's face turned a deep shade of crimson, a mix of embarrassment and rage. Leo stood there helplessly holding 2 heavy suitcases staring at the floor. "A steal, bought with my money, isn't a bargain, Blair." I continued, my voice steady. I placed a professional-looking envelope on the coffee table. "Here is the updated lease agreement. Sign it by Friday or find a new place to live. I've decided to turn the upstairs into an art studio this fall, if you aren't interested in paying your own way." Leo looked at his wife, then at me. For the first time, I saw a flicker of respect in his eyes for my newfound backbone. "You can't just kick us out. We're your family," Blair shrieked. "Legally, you can't do this." I remained unmoved. "There was no previous lease, only my permission for you to stay. Since you've treated me like a servant and trampled on my hospitality, that permission is revoked. And as for the legal side, I've already spoken to my bank and my insurance agent. All accounts are officially separated." I stood up and went into the kitchen to start dinner. The smell of fresh beef stew filled the ground floor. Blair stormed upstairs and slammed the door so hard the pictures in the hallway rattled. Leo stayed behind for a moment. His shoulders slumped. The following days were a test of willpower. Blair tried a new tactic, total social isolation. She didn't speak a word to me, scurrying through the hallway like a ghost, and forbidding Leo from helping me with the groceries. It was childish, but I didn't take the bait. Instead, I started changing the locks on the basement and garage doors. Not to lock them out, but to clearly separate the rental area from my private space. Blair watched me from the landing, arms crossed. "You'll regret this when you're old and have no one to check on you," she hissed. I paused, screwdriver in hand. "Blair, up until now, I've been the one checking on you. I've done your laundry, cooked your meals, and paid your bills. What exactly have you done for me in the last 3 years, besides complain about my decor?" She had no answer and stomped away. That evening, Leo came to the kitchen while Blair was in the shower. "Mom, she's really hurt. Does the rent have to be that much? We were planning a trip to Tuscany this summer." I looked at my son with a mix of love and pity. "Leo, you're 32 years old. If you can't afford a vacation because you have to pay rent, then you don't go. That's how life works for everyone else." On Friday night, Leo handed me the signed lease. He looked defeated. "We're staying for now until we find something else. Blair hates it, but we don't have the money for a deposit or a realtor for a new place." I took the document and checked the signatures. Good. First month's rent is due tomorrow, including the utility flat fee. And Leo, the washing machine in the basement now, has a coin-op meter. The money goes toward the detergent you've been borrowing from me. He nodded silently and went back upstairs. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt a massive sense of relief that the exploitation was over. 2 weeks after the lease was signed, my local garden club was holding its annual summer social. I'd been a member for years and volunteered to host the buffet in my garden. Blair, without checking with me, had scheduled a content shoot for her social media in the garden for that same afternoon. When she saw two men from the club setting up folding tables, she stormed out in her silk pajamas. "What is this? I reserved the patio for today. My photographer will be here in an hour." I pointed to the wall calendar in the kitchen, which was visible to everyone. "There's nothing here about your shoot, Blair. This buffet has been on the books for 2 months. I'm a tenant. I have a right to use the yard," she yelled, loud enough for the neighbors to look over the fence. I calmly pulled out the copy of the lease. "Read paragraph 4. Blair. Yard usage is not part of the rental agreement. It requires prior approval from the owner. Since you've been ignoring me for days, there was no approval." Blair went pale with fury. Leo, get down here and tell your mother to stop this." Leo stepped out onto the patio. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. He looked at the tables, then at the waiting club members, and finally at his frantic wife. For the first time in years, he did something Blair didn't expect. "She's right, Blair," he said quietly. "We didn't rent the garden. You can do the shoot at the park." Blair stared at him like he had slapped her. "You're taking her side after everything she's doing to us." Leo just shook his head. "She isn't doing anything to us. She's just setting boundaries. We're the ones acting like guests who don't want to pay the tab." Blair ran inside in tears. Leo stayed, picked up a crate of water, and helped me carry it to the tables. It was the first moment of real healing between us. After the garden disaster, Blair's behavior changed radically. She wasn't loud or demanding anymore. She fell into a sort of quiet gloom. She realized her strongest weapon, her control over Leo, had cracked. I watched through the window as she sat upstairs for hours, staring at her phone, but she hardly posted anything. Without the backdrop of my beautiful home and garden, her lifestyle brand looked hollow and empty. I, however, was thriving. I started painting again, turning the old storage room on the ground floor into a sun-drenched studio. One afternoon, there was a tentative knock on my studio door. It was Blair. She looked smaller, almost fragile without the heavy makeup and designer clothes. "Martha, can we talk just without the contracts?" I set my brush down. "Sure, Blair." She sat down and stayed silent for a long time. "I was wrong," she finally whispered. "I thought if I controlled everything, I'd be safe. But I just broke everything. Leo hardly talks to me. He's working overtime just to cover the rent." I looked at her kindly. "Safety doesn't come from controlling people, Blair. It comes from respect and standing on your own 2 feet." She looked around the studio at my half-finished canvases. "You're really independent, aren't you? You don't need us at all." "I love my son," I said honestly. "But I don't need anyone to use me just so I can feel valuable. I built this house and I'm going to protect it." Blair started to cry softly. This time, the tears didn't feel like a performance. She confessed that she was underwater with credit card debt and that the Napa trip had drained their last bit of savings. I didn't offer her money, but I offered to help her sit down and figure out a budget. The power games were over. Despite the softening of the tension, we all knew that living under one roof was no longer the answer. The wounds were too deep, and the dynamic had changed too much. Blair and Leo started seriously looking for a small apartment downtown. I helped by giving them a glowing reference, but I stayed firm on the monthly rent until the day they left. I wanted them to truly understand the value of a home. One Saturday, the moving truck arrived. It was a smaller truck than the one they came in with. They'd sold off a lot of their luxury items online to pull together a security deposit. Leo lugged boxes down the stairs while I prepared sandwiches and coffee for the movers. "Thanks for everything, Mom," he said during a break. He looked tired, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in years. "I'm sorry I stayed quiet for so long. I thought I was keeping the peace by giving in, but I was just bringing the conflict to your doorstep." I gave him a tight hug. "It's never too late, Leo. You two need to find your own way now." Without me as a safety net, Blair was the last one to come down. She held a small potted plant, a clipping from my roses. "Can I take this as a reminder?" she asked softly. I smiled. "Of course. Take good care of it. It needs plenty of light and very clear boundaries when you water it." She caught the metaphor and smiled back, a real smile this time. As the truck pulled away, I stood alone in my big house. The upstairs was empty and my footsteps echoed. But it wasn't a lonely sound. It was the sound of space that I could finally fill for myself. I went upstairs, opened all the windows wide, and let the summer breeze in. It's been 6 months since they moved out. My house has become a hub of creativity. The entire top floor is now my studio and a small gallery for my paintings. Once a month, I host a little open house, and my garden has become the official meeting spot for the hiking club. I feel more alive than I have in decades. Leo and Blair live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in the city. They come over every other Sunday for dinner. There are no demands, no expectations, just real conversation. Blair works part-time at a boutique and has given up on the Instagram obsession. She seems more grounded, more thoughtful. Last Sunday, she brought me a cake she'd baked herself. It was a little dry, but it was the first time she'd ever put in effort for me without wanting something in return. Leo is thriving at work. He just got a promotion because he isn't afraid of conflict anymore. He's learned to stand up for himself, and I know our relationship is finally built on a foundation of respect, not dependency. When I look back at my 65th birthday, the attempted boycott, the threats, I don't feel any bitterness. Blair wanted to give me a lesson in humility. But in the end, I was the one who gave them a lesson in accountability. I learned that love doesn't mean letting yourself be used, and that sometimes no is the most honest gift you can give. Those 2 empty chairs at my birthday were the beginning of my freedom. I take a sip of wine, look out at my roses, and I know this is my life. And I get to decide who has a seat at the table. My name is Martha, and I am finally home. Blair thought 2 empty chairs would break me. But the silence didn't make me smaller. It just gave me the room I needed to see the truth. Sometimes the moment they walk away from your table is exactly when you finally get your house back.